First of all, thank you very, very much, Laura, and I want to congratulate really SpecRite for doing such a phenomenal job with this conference. The energy and the passion really is palpable. This is the first time, obviously, that I've been here, and then just seeing how it's run, and then obviously all you guys, the attendees who have just made it come to life, all your inputs and involvement has been terrific. What I want to do, Laura was mentioning all this crap that is part of my CV, and I always go back to my wife going, but why don't you take the garbage out? So it's a whole other story. But what I want to do is talk today about something. You know, I've been sitting in here and listening to these conversations and discussions and dealing with challenges and issues. And the thing that's about it, it's phenomenal. It's all technical, which is great. But now I want to take the conversation from the technical side to the personal side. And I want to talk about change, because change, in fact, is personal, right? Change is what people basically define themselves, not what organizations define. It's how people view where their value and worth is in an organization. So this afternoon, I'll be very quick, but I want to give you some inputs, some insights into what change looks like today, what it's going to look like as we kind of, get into 2024, because it's shifting, it's evolving, and it's been evolving for the last 40 years or so. We started change management programs, and I've been a part of change management programs since the 80s. And back then, we were talking about change as more of a technical, tangible thing. Factories and portfolios and business models and products. Today, we're talking about change really as an intangible thing. We're talking about how people adapt, attitudes, behaviors, perspectives, points of view, bias, right? It's a completely different shift in terms of how organizations are thinking about change. But I will say this to you, if you don't get it right, you can have the best strategy, you can have the best technology, the best systems, and you'll fail. Because it's not about that. It's about getting people to basically execute and implement according to what's necessary for the business to survive and to sustain. So what we're talking about now is going from the great technical aspects of what you're doing to how do we get people to move? How do we get people motivated in terms of what's next? So I want to go through a couple things with you. Not that. I've said to you, we've been doing change for a long time. But every single study that comes out will tell you that over 70% of change efforts and change initiatives fail. Think about that. Over 70% of all the effort that's put into helping an organization, helping a function move from point A to point B, doesn't actually dictate the results that are stated at the outset. And the question is why? I want you to write this down because this is one of the biggest insights you're going to hear at this conference. Why change fails is because we suck at it. Okay? We literally suck at it. It's akin to managing the future with the mindset of the past. We keep repeating and repeating and repeating what we've done and hope that it's a different outcome. Right? We don't learn from anything. We don't take 5 steps back and say, what's happening around us? You can't change an organization or a function or a process or a system or a group of people unless you step back and you see that you have to widen your aperture. What is happening around us today? Right? There's a ton of information, most of it irrelevant. Right? Everybody has a voice. We can now tell CEOs your strategy sucks. I was with a CEO of a food and beverage company recently, and we were just talking, and he said, let me tell you the worst, when things went crappy on me. He said it was probably 15 years ago when I first got my first CEO job. This is about his third CEO job. Successful, but third one. And he said, I was sitting there, and we just had introduced a new strategy or whatever, and I got my first email back to say, you need to be fired. And he's like, before that, I could basically say anything. And all my people around me would tell me I was great. And now I was getting these emails from people in the company who told me I wasn't. And his point was, that's hard to handle. And that's the point. Everybody has a voice now, internally or externally. Anybody can tell you what they think. Right? So leaders have an incredibly difficult job today because they have to convince, in some cases, a lot of folks, customers, suppliers, communities, regulators, employees, that what the business is doing and where it's investing is important. They didn't really have to do that before. They had distinct audience groups, financial community, et cetera. They didn't really have to spend that time. Today they do. Today communications is in fact, it's basically is leadership. Communications is change. And so we're now at a point where we have to look at what's happening around us and we have to adjust to what it means. How are we going to do this? Now, the other thing that I will tell you, and I think this is very, very important, is that you have to understand one very, very important thing about organizations today. People are working with the volume off. There's so much information, there's so much data that they're not listening anymore. And guess what? We're still talking. Right? We're still communicating like they are listening, but they're not. Because guess what? They heard it all before. Right? There's not a lot of trust or belief anymore in what organizations say. I'm not being critical, it just isn't. How many people believe when a CEO leaves a company, he wants to spend more time with his family? I mean, come on. So they don't believe it anymore. So what are they doing if they're not listening? They're watching. They're watching. And they're seeing if, in fact, what you're saying in terms of your rhetoric, your strategy, your intent, your direction, your vision, is in fact what you're doing. You can't be customer-centric if you just lay 10 people off in your call center. Now, maybe that was justified, but if you don't explain it, they don't know. Because that's what they see. So change and communications, which are inextricably linked, has to recognize that. Today, you cannot sell anybody anything. People have to discover. Your communications have to be discovery-led. One of the major problems of change, which we'll get into, is that think about how a change initiative is formed. Everybody gets excited at the top, right? We brand it. You got to have a brand. You got to have a mouse pad, a coffee mug, or whatever. You got to have a theme, right? So you brand it, which means that you make it a campaign, which means it's already dead on arrival. Because how many coffee mugs can people have that say one team, one mission, right? So we automatically start with the premise that we're going to sell the change. And then we tell everybody, don't worry about it. It's going to make us better. Trust me. There's 6 steps to get to heaven. Now, by the way, my wife does believe that, and she thinks I failed all 6. But there aren't 6 steps to get to heaven, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you that today. But that's what we do. We already tell them on day 1 what it's all going to look like. And it never does, because change is not a linear process. Change is an iterative process. It's an experimentation. People have to figure it out themselves. That's the whole thing with AI right now. All these pundits are out there talking about AI. None of them know what the hell they're talking about. It's not critical. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying we don't know yet. We're experimenting with it. We're trying it. And to do it, we need to do it together as a community and figure out where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. But we basically kill change the day we announce it, because we don't give anybody a chance to discover it. to absorb it, to test it. So, common mistakes in change, and I've already told you one. First and foremost, you make it a campaign. As soon as you make change a campaign, it's dead. As soon as the coffee mug comes out, it's over. Even though people go, hey, thank you very much, I needed that. Right? It's done. Change is not a campaign. It's a way of operating. It's a way of thinking. You're changing behavior, you're changing attitude, you're changing perspective. And you have to make sure that part of that is something that people can absorb. Change is not a process. You know, a lot of consulting firms come in. We work with a lot of consulting firms because usually what happens is the company hires a consulting firm, they muck it up, and then they call a communications firm in to help salvage it. And how do they muck it up? It's a process. They tell you about all the meetings that they're going to have and when the meetings are going to be there. And then they write reports to say, we had a meeting. Right? And here's when the next meeting is. And nobody knows what the hell's going on. But they just keep going. Right? Change isn't a process. Change is a way of thinking. Change allows people. Now, in order for that to happen, what do people have to know? They have to know a lot. They have to know competition. They have to know industry, pricing, market factors. Right? And if you don't have a strong internal communications apparatus at your company, your change will fail. Because basically, you're not educating your workforce. Right? Take all the information, this is something we do on a regular, take all the information that's communicated, you know, of value, not all the little stuff, but all of value, within a 12-month period, add it up and find out, did I make my workforce smarter, dumber, or about the same? And you'd be surprised at what that answer is. Because most organizations don't regard internal communications as something important. It's actually the lifeblood of the business. Right? Internal communications helps change stick because it allows people to actually know stuff. And to do it well, you've got to make sure that you're getting people's attention. Right? Most internal communications is cheerleading. We're the best. We're the greatest. We've done this. We've done that. Until you go bankrupt. Right? Then you take your coffee mug and you go home. Right? You've got to be provocative. When Howard Schultz at Starbucks, he had left the company, he came back to the company, and he was with his team, and they're like, well, you know, how are we going to talk to our employees about this? Because that's the big audience. He had 15,000 employees at the time. How are we going to talk to them? And, you know, his team was like, well, we got to just tell it how great it is for you to come back. You know, this is your company, and you love it, and we've got a great future. And he's like, that's not why I'm coming back. I'm coming back because I was in a Starbucks in Arizona, and I smelled eggs. And I founded a coffee company. But we were chasing McCafe. Remember when McDonald's introduced McCafe? And all, you know, Starbucks got nervous under the old regime. So his note to employees said, why are we losing? And 15,000 people stood up and applauded, figuratively. Because that's what they felt. They were smelling the same eggs. They were making them. Right? They wanted to get back to being a coffee company. And he wanted to change the culture. And the only way to change the culture is to be what? Authentic. Is to tell people that you understand what they're feeling. You understand the vagaries of the business. It's not all rose petals. And that's what really change is based on. It's your ability to adapt to a changing or shifting marketplace in a manner that keeps you ahead of the competition. That's what it's about. right? So you've got to be honest, you've got to be provocative, and you've got to make sure internal communications are supporting you in this endeavor. The other thing is, employees are not an audience, for God's sakes. They're on stage with you. They're part of the show. They have their own networks, their own ecosystems, right? They know when something is bad before you do, because they live it, right? Employees are advocates. If you allow them to be advocates, if you bring them into the tent, if you allow them to understand what you're doing and allow them to plot the course with you, they're powerful. To me, that's the last area of competitive differentiation, is your talent, your workforce. Because they'll drive innovation. They'll drive change. They'll drive sustainability. But if you treat them as an audience, and you think they're going to sit there and absorb, you're kidding yourself. Doesn't work. The last thing, which is another important thing, communications is not a tactic. That's one of the big reasons why consulting firms don't win in this process, because they treat communications as a tactic, as a PowerPoint, as an event, as a newsletter, as a video. It's not. Communications is integral to the way the process is. If you're going through some type of change effort, if you're trying to basically deploy a new technology, like SpecRite, you need communications people with you to figure out how to get it done. You need a team of people to work with you to make sure that you are, first of all, identifying the right stakeholders and needs and timing and cadence and tonality and frequency. You can't do it alone, right? So when you look at the 4 common mistakes, that's why 70% of change efforts don't work. Because we keep repeating this, rinse and repeat. So who needs to change? Well, I would just say this. Every time I walk into an organization, the first thing I hear from management or leadership is, my employees don't get it. You know, we're just not changing. They're good people, but you know, they don't like change. And the reality is, yeah, it's tough to change, right? It's tough to change. But the bottom line is, we don't give people the rationale or the reason to change. We don't give them the why. We don't give them the how. We don't give them the support or the training or the attention. And then we expect them to just, again, believe what we say. We think by giving them a PowerPoint on what the change is, they're going to go, whoa, hon, you wouldn't believe what I just had this afternoon. What a change PowerPoint I got in. Right? And I got a mug with it. They don't, you're not putting yourself in the shoes. I was saying, I think to Laura earlier today, you know, some of it's generational, and I understand that. But the thing that we have to get out of our comfort zone is, I know what I said. I don't know what you heard. I have no idea what you're hearing. I know what I'm telling you. And you know what you're telling your employees about what needs to be done, but you don't know how they're interpreting it. You don't know how they're understanding it. You don't know how their language, if the language is even. If I could, I would remove change from change management. Because I think when you put change in change management, people's eyes glaze over. You've already lost them because they've been through it for so long. Right? So I think a big part of it is figuring out what we as leaders and managers have to change, not what our employees have to change. We have to change what we do and how we do it. And that to me is a huge shift in what we're doing. I think when you look at, well, then how do I do this? Look, we're not going to swallow the ocean this afternoon. But I would say to you, there are some things to think about. One is, if you're not changing the conversation internally, you're not changing the organization. right? You have to change the conversation internally. You have to figure out what you want to talk about and the tone for it. That Schultz example exemplifies that. He didn't want to talk about how great things were. He wanted to talk about what needed to actually change. He wanted to talk about why the company was losing and how it was going to get back to where it was as the preeminent beverage company, coffee beverage company. Right? You have to change the conversation. You've got to change the way people are seeing things. You can't keep doing what you're doing and then come in here and say, hey, we've got this great new technology. Doesn't work, right? The other thing is you've got to make change inclusive. Don't start out with, here's what I want them to do. Start out with, here's what we're trying to solve together. Now let's look at what are the options we have to get that done. Make people part of the effort. You know how many employees we talk to every year involved in business transformation or digital transformation, another big hot button, right? Throw digital on anything and, just like throw AI on anything and you'll sell out the crowd, right? And they'll sit there and go, yeah, I know, but nobody's told me what that means. What am I changing to? Right? Because we're so basically in a place where we have to push things forward, we forget to step back and say, you can't get people here if you don't agree with where they are here. You have to start here. We always start change here at the end. We don't start change at the beginning, where people are, what they see, what they feel, what they believe. So making it inclusive allows you to have that feedback, that two-way street. You have to engage leaders and managers. You know how many change efforts die because the leader goes, look, just keep your head down. We'll get through this. This is our 5th change in 20 months, right? We'll get through it. But if you keep your head down, you put your mug on top of your desk, you'll be fine, right? How many times do you hear that? Because if the leader doesn't believe in it, that's the interface. That the company is personified by the manager. We just did a 3-continent study for a pharmaceutical company on leaders and managers and employees and their relationship. And regardless of where you are in the world, it's the same thing. If my leader or manager believes it, I believe it. If he or she doesn't, I ignore it. Right? And we don't spend enough time with leaders and managers to get that done. The other thing that I would say is you have to have a goal line, but you also have to have milestones. You have to give people a chance to understand where the road is, right? And how you're going to manage and how we're going to learn from it. Even if we don't get to the milestone, how are we going to basically pivot? Critically important. And then the last thing, which is so subtle and simple, I want to vomit. But it's one of the biggest reasons why change doesn't work. We don't make it important. We announce it. We give out all the tchotchkes. And then 2 months later, we're on to something else. There's no consistency to it. People, when you do that to people over time, they get it. They're not stupid. It was one story when I was at GM. We had introduced this new manufacturing system. We had studied Toyota and whatever. We introduced this new manufacturing system, and part of it was a huge internal communications effort with our UAW employees. And part of it was every month, the plant manager would get a deck, maybe 8 to 10 slides, to talk about what was happening in the business and then what was happening in his or her plant, right? So it was very much a global and then local discussion. And it was new because GM hadn't done this before. And so the first couple of months, it was a disaster. I mean, I went to several of these things, and the plant manager would get up there. First of all, we had to negotiate with the UAW to give people 20 minutes to go to the thing. That was a whole other deal. And so he gets up there, and he's talking about things, and then he opens it up for questions. And I'm not making any of this up, People would raise their hand and go, yeah, that's terrific. You know what? You need more mayonnaise in the tuna fish in the cafeteria. I mean, it's been dry for 3 months. And I don't know what the deal is. So he, basically, he would take that and say, okay, we'll get on that. Raise your hand. Yeah. It's cold in Building 7. I mean, this is Michigan, man. Do you put the heat on? Do we pay our heat bills here? What's GM do? Got it. Thank you very much. Yes, over here. There's a big hole in the parking lot on the south end. And I lost my car in there yesterday. Can we get the car out and maybe fill the hole in? And so the plant managers were getting this vibe all over like 114 different facilities. And they were emailing the crap out of the CEO. And so, of course, he calls me and he's like, we're going to cancel this program. This is not going to work anymore. I got plant managers up my butt. And I'm like, do me a favor. Let's just do it for another 2 or 3 months. I said, my gut tells me there's something here that we haven't figured out. And quite frankly, what was happening was, and this is what I mean about making it important, people were pushing the buttons of the business because they had been through this kind of thing so many other times where we started with, let's have meetings with our employees and tell them what's going on, and let's search for ideas, and blah, 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 blah. And then 2 months later, what happened to the meetings? Oh, he's busy, canceled, scheduled, and then it ended. So they were pushing the buttons, right? 6 months into it, all of a sudden the questions were like, hey, we need better gloves for this. We need to reduce our inventory here if we do this. We need a different way of putting the dashboard in. All positive, productive inputs, suggestions. Because what they were doing was saying, hey guys, I'll go along for the ride, but I'm going to get off as soon as I think that you're going to get off. In fact, I want to get off before you do. Right? And we kept it up. To this day, they still use that process. Right? But you have to make change important. That's key. The other thing I'll share with you is several years ago, I wrote an article called The Day Kmart Died. And the Wall Street Journal was like, Kmart died like 12 times. And the Wall Street Journal article was like, okay, Kmart died. Of course it died. It can't compete with Walmart, doesn't have a merchandising strategy, its footprint in the U.S. is not, as robust as, and I'm sitting there going, Kmart, you got to be kidding me. Kmart died like 2 years ago. When you drove in the parking lot at dusk and it said K-Art because they didn't change the light bulb in the M, right? Or you walked inside and there was clothes strewn all over the place. There was no rhyme or reason, right? Or they had one cashier for 100 people at Christmas time, right? Kmart died because somebody didn't make it important. The symptom was the lack of a merchandising strategy. That wasn't the cause. The cause was they had poor leadership. Somebody forgot to understand what it was to be Kmart. And that's what I'm saying to you guys. Look at the cause of things, particularly in a change effort. Don't chase symptoms because you're going to go nowhere with that. So I want to just go through some quick things for you for 2024, just to think about. And these are macro, so, just take it for what it's worth. First and foremost, after 3 years of COVID, organizations are realizing that you can't assume that people know who you are. So companies are starting to reintroduce themselves, internally and externally. Their values, right? Their philosophies, their efficacy. It's very, very important. And if you want to change processes or symptoms or functional areas, you've got to recognize it starts at the top. Who are we? Are we the same company we were before all this happened? Second thing is, you need a fresh story, right? Don't try to implement change on an old narrative. There's got to be some inspiration and belief in what you're doing as a business. And I heard a lot of that today in terms of what you guys, in the packaging area particularly, what you guys are doing for the environment, for sustainability, to make sure you bring the right salads home. I was ready to buy one for lunch. The freshness came right out. And then the last thing is internal. The last thing is internal. Today, the number one goal for any CEO is organizational confidence. That's what everybody should be working on. Is this company built for the long haul? Is this company investing in innovation? Is this company promoting talent? Critical. Critical. Because if you don't have organizational confidence, everything else is a religious discussion. Right? It's just noise. I'm not suggesting my wife would kill me on that one, but so how do we make it happen? A couple things to think about as we wrap up. We can take some questions if there's time. Always, 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 what are you solving for in change? What are you looking to achieve? What is it, that specific thing that you want somebody else to do, or a group of people to do, in order to basically achieve a goal? What needs to be improved to get there? What are you aiming for? Where's all your efforts going to? What are you willing to let go of to get there? There's always a trade-off in life and in business. How do you engage people on the journey? What are the hot buttons? Where does training fit in? I can't imagine today. Sometimes companies want to move huge ships, and there's no training in the budget for what that looks like and what skills people are going to need to adapt to or actually acquire. Who owns the effort? Right? A lot of times it starts with a huge bang from the leader, CEO or leader of the function, and then that person disappears. That's my point about making it important. Where do people believe the organization is right now? The key factor in getting people to change. It's not where you want them to go, it's where they think they are right now and why. Because then you can build a continuum to the future. But if you start here and you ignore that, you'll never get there. It just won't happen. What is the company's narrative? What's your story? Every company has a story. And I'm not talking about having a story that you're going to put up on a mug or a poster or in your lobby. I'm talking about the way in which you talk about your company today. What are the things it believes in? What its challenges, its opportunities, its investments? Right? How do you characterize your company? And then, is internal communications aligned and connected to leadership, or is it an appendage? Is what you're doing based on the way the business is seeing itself and leading itself? Or is it just something that a bunch of tactics get done because, let's have a town hall and let's do this. And none of it's synchronized. If that's the case, you're not going to get very far. At the end of the day, guys, change is what I said at the outset. Change is about people and their ability to adapt, to flex, to pivot, to believe. And that's all based on trust and confidence. And if you can start to address those things, you're going to go further along than you probably can even imagine today. Thank you very much.